The first cut is the deepest, they say. But they're wrong. It's the 1000th cut that does you in. The one that finds the single, hairline crack in your foundation and follows it, patiently, relentlessly, until the entire structure of who you are threatens to collapse. For me, that cut came not with a scream, but with a whisper. A name on a computer screen, in a font so plain and bureaucratic it felt like an insult to the cataclysm it represented. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The story doesn't start with the name. It starts with the silence. The silence I had cultivated like a rare and fragile orchid for 15 years. My name is Alara Thorne, and I am a master of silence. I wear it like a second skin beneath my prosecutor's suit. In the echoing, high-ceilinged hallways of the courthouse, where the air smells of old wood and anxious sweat, my silence is a tool. It unspools behind me as I walk, a quiet warning. It sits beside me at the prosecution table, a steady, unnerving presence. Defendants, when they glance my way, see a woman composed of sharp angles and calm eyes. They see the neat chignon, the unadorned hands, the posture that suggests a spine forged from something stronger than bone. They do not see the ocean. They do not see the riptide of memory and feeling that I keep leashed, moment, by an act of sheer, exhausting will. They see the dam. They never see the water. That morning, the morning the world began to tilt, had been a masterpiece of my control. I was in Judge Colbert's courtroom, arguing a pretrial motion on a complex fraud case. My opponent, a slick, perpetually smirking defense attorney named Richard Moore, was trying to have a key piece of evidence thrown out on a technicality. He was all bluster and theatrical size, waving his hands like a conductor leading an orchestra of outrage. "Your Honor, this is a clear violation of my client's Fourth Amendment rights," he boomed, his voice filling the space. The warrant was overly broad, the seizure was a fishing expedition of the most egregious kind. I waited. I let his words hang in the air, let them dissipate into the quiet I held around me. I stood, smooth and deliberate. "Your Honor," I began, my voice level, a counterpoint to his theatrics. The warrant was specific, the affidavit detailed. The fishing expedition counsel refers to as, in fact, a thorough investigation that uncovered a pattern of deliberate, systematic deception totaling over $2 million. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I laid out the facts, one after another, like placing stones on a scale. Each one was cool, hard, unassailable. I could feel the judge's attention, a tangible thing, shifting from Moore's performance to my quiet certainty. Judge Colbert, a man whose face seemed permanently set in a frown of profound disappointment, nodded slowly. "Motion denied. The evidence is admissible. Ms. Thorne, proceed." It was a small victory, a routine one. But it was built on the bedrock of my control. As I gathered my files, Richard Moore shot me a look of pure irritation. "You're a cool one, Thorne," he muttered under his breath. "Does anything ever get under that skin?" I didn't answer. I just gave him a small, polite smile that didn't reach my eyes, and walked away. The silence followed me. That was before the phone call. Before the 2:17 a.m. resurrection from the dead sleep that is the only kind of sleep I seem to get these days. The phone's shrill ring is a sound that bypasses my ears and goes straight to my primal brain, to the lizard part that knows only fear and flight. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was trying to escape the cage of my ribs. The glow of the screen was a malevolent eye in the darkness. Detective Mills. It was always Mills for the bad ones. "Alara," he said, and that single word, the way he said it, stripped of all the usual pleasantries, told me everything. The world was about to get messy. "We've got a bad one. Hit and run on the interstate. Pedestrian. They're not going to make it. We have a vehicle description, partial plate. I need you down here." I was already moving, a automaton programmed for crisis. "I'm on my way." "The family?" "Not yet identified. No wallet. Just, hurry." The drive was a tunnel through the sleeping city. Streetlights strobed across my windshield, each one a fleeting, silent witness to the turmoil inside the car. This was the part one hated most, the transition. The drive from my quiet, solitary apartment to the chaos of a crime scene. It was in this car, in this suspended space between worlds, that the armor was the hardest to put on. Here, I was just Alara. The woman who drank too much coffee, who loved the quiet hum of NPR in the background, whose most passionate relationship was with a stack of books on her nightstand. The woman whose life was a monument to a loss so profound she had built an entire career around never having to feel its like again. I could feel her, that other Alara, clinging to me as I drove. I could feel the ghost of her hopes, her softness. And I had to gently, firmly, peel her away. By the time I saw the pulsating carnival of police lights ahead, painting the pre-dawn mist in hues of emergency, she was gone. Locked away. In her place was the ADA. The professional. The machine. The scene was a brutalist painting. The air was cold and carried the sharp, acrid smells of spilled gasoline, scorched rubber, and something else, something coppery and organic. The ruined car was a sculpture of violence, its front end concertinaed into a shape that was no longer recognizable as automotive. And further down, a small, lonely form under a white sheet. The sheet was the worst part. Its dark, clinical whiteness against the grimy asphalt. Its terrible, final smallness. I made my eyes skate over it. I could not afford to see the shape beneath. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Detective Mills met me, his face a roadmap of long nights and too many tragedies. He was a good man, Mills, solid and decent, and the job had worn grooves of permanent sorrow around his eyes. Witness saw a dark SUV swerve, hit him, and just keep going. Didn't even slow down. We found the vehicle abandoned a mile away. Stolen. Him? I asked, my voice a carefully calibrated instrument of neutrality. Mills nodded, a short, grim gesture toward the sheet. Young. Maybe early 20s. We're running his prints now. I walked the scene. My leather soles made a precise, authoritative sound on the gravel. This was a language I understood. The language of evidence. I spoke to the forensics photographer, a young woman with tired eyes. Get close-ups of the paint transfer on the victims, on the clothing. I pointed to the skid marks. Measure these. I want the acceleration and deceleration patterns analyzed. I was building the case. Brick by brick. Fact by fact. A stolen car. A reckless driver. A faceless victim. It was a tragedy, yes, but it was a solvable one. It was a puzzle, and puzzles were things I could fix. This was my purpose. To bring order to chaos. To impose narrative on senselessness. Back at the office, as a weak, gray dawn began to bleed into the sky, the world still felt solid beneath my feet. I had my coffee. I had my notes. I had the beginnings of a case file. I was in my element, surrounded by the quiet hum of computers and the soft rustle of paper. This was where I was powerful. This was where I was safe. Then Mills called. His voice was different. It was the tone you use when you have to tell someone their house has burned down. Alara, he said, and there was a hesitation, a space in the conversation that filled instantly with my dread. We got an ID on the victim. His name was Liam O'Connell. The name landed, but it didn't stick. It was just a name. A collection of syllables. Liam O'Connell. I wrote it down on a fresh legal pad. Victim, Liam O'Connell. Okay, I said, my professional facade intact. Liam O'Connell. 21 years old. Student? The pause on the other end of the line was so long I thought the connection had dropped. Alara, Mills said again, and my name was now a warning, a plea. His emergency contact is listed as a Siobhan O'Connell. His mother. And then, the world did not so much tilt as it liquefied. The solid floor of my office became shifting sand. Siobhan O'Connell. It couldn't be. It was a common name. But the cold certainty that had been my companion since 2:17 a.m. now coiled tight in my gut, a snake ready to strike. His father is deceased, Mills continued, his voice soft, as if he were handling broken glass. Listed as Patrick O'Connell. Patrick O'Connell. The name was a key, turning a lock I had sealed shut 15 years ago. The door blew open, and the past rushed out, not as a memory, but as a physical force. It stole the air from my lungs. My hand, holding the phone, began to tremble. I had to put it down on the desk, my fingers suddenly numb. Patrick O'Connell. My first major case. The one that made me. The one that broke me. I was 26 years old, my idealism still a bright, untarnished shield. I believed in truth, justice, and the power of a good argument. Patrick O'Connell was a pillar of the community. He sat on charity boards, his photo was in the society pages, he had a handshake that could crush bones and a smile that didn't quite reach his cold, blue eyes. His wife, Siobhan, was a quiet, delicate woman with the most expressive hands I had ever seen. They were always moving, twisting a tissue, smoothing her skirt, fluttering to her throat like wounded birds. She came to us after a fall down the stairs that had left her with 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, and a shattered spirit. I was the junior ADA assigned to her case. My boss, a weary, cynical man named Frank, warned me. These domestic cases, Thorn. They're quicksand. The victims recant. The families close ranks. It's a heartbreaker. But I was young and I saw the raw terror in Siobhan's eyes, a deep, liquid brown, and I was determined to be her hero. I spent nights with her, not just preparing her testimony, but holding her while she cried, bringing her tea, reassuring her. I met her son, Liam. A small, silent shadow of a boy, 6 years old, with a thatch of dark hair and huge, watchful eyes. He never spoke during our meetings. He would just sit in the corner of the room, drawing on a legal pad with a stubby crayon. He drew pictures of monsters, usually big, shapeless things with lots of teeth. Sometimes, he would draw a family, a tall, faceless man, a woman with long, brown hair, and a very small boy, standing far away. I worked that case with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I was in the office before dawn, I left long after midnight. I learned the patterns of abuse, the cycle of violence, the way a man like Patrick O'Connell could twist reality until his victim doubted her own sanity. I fought his high-priced, sneering lawyers. I fought a system that was often indifferent. I fought Siobhan's own mother, who called her a troublemaker, who told her to be a better wife. The trial was a brutal affair. Patrick's defense team dragged Siobhan through the mud. They implied she was clumsy, unstable, that she had a drinking problem. They presented photos of her from a college party, 15 years prior, as evidence of her character. Through it all, she held my gaze. I was her anchor. And little Liam, who had to be brought to court one day, sat in the gallery, his small legs dangling from the wooden bench, his eyes fixed on his mother. We won. The moment the foreman said guilty, it was like the entire courtroom exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. Siobhan collapsed into sobs of relief. The press swarmed. I was the bright young star, the avenging angel. And in the midst of the chaos, Liam, the silent boy, walked up to me. He didn't say a word. He just reached out and took my hand, holding it for a long, solemn moment. Then he gave me one of his drawings. It wasn't a monster this time. It was a woman, with a black robe and a gavel, standing between a smaller woman and a large, scowling blob. A superhero. That small, wordless gesture felt more meaningful than any conviction. It felt like I had saved them. I had actually, truly, saved them. But the story wasn't over. The world has a way of punishing those who disrupt its narratives. Patrick O'Connell was sentenced to 7 years. 3 years in, he was diagnosed with cancer. A rare, aggressive type. He was granted a compassionate release. He died 6 months later. And with his death, the story was rewritten. The powerful, abusive husband became a tragic figure, a life cut short. The wife who had endured years of terror was now the woman who had put a dying man in prison. The narrative of a good man who made a few mistakes was far more palatable than the ugly truth of a sustained campaign of terror behind closed doors. The phone calls from Siobhan stopped. The few times I reached out, her voice was flat, distant. The weight of public judgment had crushed the relief she had felt. The last time I saw her, she was in a supermarket, looking thin and worn. Liam, a gawky teenager now, was with her, his shoulders hunched, his face a mask of adolescent resentment. Our eyes met across the produce aisle. For a second, I saw the woman I had known, the one with the hopeful eyes. Then, a shutter came down. She looked through me, as if I were a stranger, and turned her cart down another aisle. I stood there, holding a bunch of bananas, feeling the loss so profound it left me dizzy. I had given her justice, but I had not been able to give her peace. I had, in some terrible, unintended way, made her an outcast. That was the day I built the dam. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of my office that night and I made a vow. Never again. I would never again let a case get personal. I would never again confuse my role with that of a savior. I was a mechanic of the law. I would fix the broken parts with logic and evidence. Emotion was a faulty tool. Empathy was a liability. My heart was to be kept under lock and key, a silent partner to my sharp, discerning mind. That was the price of being effective. That was the price of survival. For 15 years, I had paid that price. I had become one of the most respected prosecutors in the district. I was known for my cool head, my unshakable logic, my ability to win the unwinnable cases. And now, 15 years later, the past had found me. Liam O'Connell. The little boy with the crayons was a body on a slab. The case had come full circle, and it had landed on my desk with the weight of a tombstone. I had to go see Siobhan. It wasn't just protocol, it was a pilgrimage. A debt I had to acknowledge. The drive to her house was a journey back in time. The neighborhood had changed, grown a little shabbier. Her house, which I remembered as being bright and welcoming, now looked tired. The paint was peeling, the garden was a tangle of weeds, a tricycle rusted in the front yard, a relic from a different family, a different life. I knocked on the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. When she opened it, the years fell away and also compressed into the deep lines on her face. She was only in her late 40s, but she looked decades older. Her hair was a lifeless gray, pulled back into a loose bun. But her eyes were the same. Those deep, brown wells, only now, they were completely dry. The grief was too deep for tears. It had burned them all away. "Elara," she said. She wasn't surprised. It was as if she had been waiting for me, as if she knew this day would inevitably come. "Siobhan," I managed, my voice cracking. I'm so sorry." She nodded, a slow, weary motion, and stepped back to let me in. The house was dim, the curtains drawn against the day. It smelled of dust and old memories. The living room was a shrine to a fractured life. On the mantelpiece, photographs told the story in snapshots. A wedding photo, Siobhan, young and radiant, Patrick handsome and smiling, his arm possessively around her. Pictures of Liam, a gap-toothed first grader, a awkward preteen, a handsome young man in a high school graduation gown, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He had his mother's eyes. We sat in the oppressive quiet. She didn't offer me tea. She just sat, her hands folded in her lap, and began to speak in that same, flat monotone. He was in his 3rd year. Engineering. He was so smart, Elara. So much smarter than I ever was. She spoke about his grades, his part-time job, his girlfriend, Maya. She recited the facts of his life as if reading from an obituary. He was coming home from the library. He always studied there. Said it was too quiet here. She let out a short, hollow sound that might have been a laugh. He was a good boy. After his father, after everything, it was hard. Kids at school said things. Teachers looked at him differently. But he was good. He was all I had. Her gaze lifted and settled on me, direct and unnerving. "You were there at the start of all this," she said, "and it wasn't an accusation, just a stark, unbearable fact. And now you're here at the end." The weight of her words pressed the air from my lungs. "We're going to find who did this, Siobhan," I said, the promise feeling flimsy and inadequate. "We have a good lead. We will get justice for Liam." She gave me that same, small, bitter smile I remembered from the grocery store. "Justice," she repeated, rolling the word around in her mouth like a bitter pill. "You said that the last time." There was nothing I could say to that. No defense. The cracks in my dam widened. I stood to leave, my legs unsteady. As I walked to the door, my eyes fell on a small, framed drawing tucked beside the grander photographs. It was one of Liam's. The one he had given me. The superhero with the gavel. She had kept it. All these years, she had kept it. The investigation moved with a grim, efficient speed. We found our driver. Marcus Thorne. 24 years old. His life was a catalogue of small-time failures, dropped out of high school, a series of dead-end jobs, a rap sheet that read like a manual for petty crime, shoplifting, possession, breaking and entering. The SUV had been stolen from a used car lot a few hours before the incident. He'd been high on meth, according to a friend we picked up. He'd panicked and run. He was, in every sense of the word, a nobody. A ghost who had stepped out of the shadows for one moment to erase a life, and then retreated back into them. Building the case was mechanically straightforward. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of facts pointing to his guilt. It should have been easy. It should have been just another file, another name, another conviction to add to my record. But it wasn't. Every time I typed Liam O'Connell into a report, I saw the 6-year-old boy with the crayon. Every time I reviewed the Emmys photos, I saw the young man from the graduation picture. My professional detachment, my hard-won control, began to feel like a grotesque pantomime. I was going through the motions, but the ghost of Liam O'Connell was in the room with me, a silent, accusing presence. The trial began on a Tuesday. The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. I took my place at the prosecution table, arranging my notepad, my pens, my water glass with a precision that felt manic. I did not look at Siobhan, who sat directly behind me. I could feel her, though. A gravitational pull of sorrow. Marcus Thorne slouched at the defense table, looking bored and resentful. His lawyer, David Chin, was a competent public defender, kind-eyed and overworked. And on the bench, Judge Colbert, the guardian of his temple of reason. I began my opening statement. My voice was calm, my delivery measured. I laid out the timeline, the evidence, the chain of events. I was the picture of professional composure. I was the dam, holding fast. The evidence will show, I concluded, that the defendant, Marcus Thorne, operating a stolen vehicle while under the influence of narcotics, struck and killed Liam O'Connell, and then callously fled the scene, showing a complete and utter disregard for human life. David Chin stood for his opening. He was smart. He didn't try to fight the facts. He fought the soul of the case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice warm and reasonable. What happened to Liam O'Connell is an undeniable tragedy. A young life, full of promise, was cut short. But a tragedy is not the same as murder. The evidence will show that Marcus Thorne is a young man himself, a man who has struggled with addiction and poverty his entire life. He made a series of terrible, reckless decisions that night. He was scared, he was high, and he panicked. This is not a case about a monster. This is a case about a broken human being who made a catastrophic mistake. I listened, my jaw tight. He was trying to erase Liam, to reduce him to a mere consequence of Marcus Thorne's mistake. The heat began to rise in my chest, a slow, dangerous simmer. The trial progressed. I presented my evidence. The forensic expert, the witness, the detective. I was precise. I was logical. I was winning. Then, during David Chen's cross-examination of Detective Mills, the first crack appeared visibly. Detective, Chen said, his tone conversational, would it be fair to say that Mr. Thorne, in his impaired and panicked state, likely didn't intend for this to happen? That he didn't wake up that morning with the thought, I'm going to kill someone today? It was a standard ploy. But hearing him use Liam's death as a rhetorical device, to soften the edges of Thorne's responsibility, made something snap inside me. I was on my feet. Objection. Counsel is speculating. The defendant's intent is irrelevant to the charges of vehicular homicide and failure to remain at the scene of a fatal accident. My voice was too loud, too sharp. It cut through the quiet room like a shard of glass. Judge Colbert peered down at me, his expression displeased. Sustained. Ms. Thorne, control your tone. Ms. Thorne. The paternalistic rebuke. The command. Control yourself. I sat down, my face burning. I had shown them a flicker of the ocean behind the dam. The trial continued. I called the medical examiner. He was a small, precise man with a dispassionate way of describing horror. He talked about blunt force trauma, about transected aortas, about the force required to cause such injuries. As he spoke, I made the fatal mistake of glancing at Siobhan. She was a statue of grief. Her face was ashen, her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She was hearing the clinical, brutal details of her son's destruction. And I was the one who had orchestrated this. I was the one making her sit here and listen to this autopsy report, reducing her beautiful boy to a list of injuries. The medical examiner finished. It was my turn for a redirect. I stood up, but my mind was a roaring white noise. The carefully crafted questions I had prepared had evaporated. All I could see was Siobhan's face. All I could feel was the weight of my own complicity in this fresh hell I was putting her through. The silence stretched. The jury shifted. Judge Colbert cleared his throat. Ms. Thorne? Your question? I looked at him, then at the jury, then at the medical examiner. The words that came out were not from the prosecutor's playbook. They were from the heart of a woman who was drowning. Doctor, I said, my voice trembling, betraying me completely. The victim. Liam O'Connell, did he suffer? The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had crossed a line. It was the most unprofessional, emotionally driven question I could possibly have asked. David Chin was up like a shot. Objection. Relevance? The cause of death is not in dispute. This is an blatant, inflammatory appeal to emotion. Judge Colbert's face was thunderous. Sustained. The jury will disregard that question. He leaned forward, his voice a low, angry growl. Ms. Thorne, a sidebar. No. I walked to the bench, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. David Chin joined us, his expression a mixture of pity and strategic satisfaction. What in God's name are you playing at, counselor? Judge Colbert hissed, his voice barely audible over the white noise generator. That was a disgraceful breach of protocol. I will not have my courtroom turned into a soap opera. Your Honor, I had no excuse. Nothing that would hold water in his temple of reason. I have been patient, he seethed. I know this is a difficult case. But you are an officer of this court. You will stick to the facts. You will control your emotions, or I will hold you in contempt and have you removed from this case. Is that understood? Control your emotions. The phrase was a key that unlocked not my compliance, but my rebellion. It was the mantra of my life, the lie I had been living for 15 years. Looking at his stern, impatient face, I realized the dam was not just cracking. It was gone. The ocean was rising, and I was done trying to hold it back. I understand, Your Honor, I whispered, but the words were empty. I didn't understand anymore. I didn't understand a world where speaking the truth of a person's suffering was a breach of protocol. The trial moved to its conclusion. The defense rested. Closing arguments were next. David Chin went first. He was magnificent. He spoke not with anger, but with a profound, convincing sadness. He talked about cycles of poverty and addiction. He asked the jury to see Marcus Thorne not as a monster, but as a symptom of a sick society. He asked them for compassion. For a verdict that acknowledged the tragedy but also acknowledged the humanity of the broken man who caused it. He asked for manslaughter. He was planting seeds of doubt, and I could see them taking root in the faces of the jurors. Then, it was my turn. I stood up. I walked to the podium. I looked at my notes, at the brilliant, logical argument I had crafted. It was a fortress. And I knew, with a certainty that was as terrifying as it was liberating, that I could not hide inside it anymore. I left my notes on the podium. I turned to face the jury, my hands empty. Liam O'Connell, I began, my voice quiet but clear, a stark contrast to Chen's polished oration. I want to tell you about Liam O'Connell. I saw the surprise on their faces. Judge Colbert stiffened, but he didn't stop me. Perhaps he saw something in my face that gave him pause. The evidence has told you how he died. But I want to tell you who he was. Because the law deals in facts, but justice has to deal in truths. And the truth is that a person is more than the sum of their injuries. I took a steadying breath, letting the ocean rise, letting it fill my voice. I knew Liam when he was 6 years old. He was a quiet little boy who had seen things no child should ever see. He was a boy who drew pictures of monsters because he didn't have the words to describe the one that lived in his own home. He clung to his mother's leg because she was the only safe harbor in a world that had proven itself to be terrifyingly unpredictable. I dared a glance at Siobhan. She was watching me, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. His mother, Siobhan, fought for him. She fought with a courage that still humbles me to this day. She walked through fire to get him to a safer shore. And Liam, he grew up. He became a young man who valued quiet, who valued hard work. He studied engineering because he wanted to build things, to create order out of chaos. He had a girlfriend he loved. He came home from the library, tired, his mind full of numbers and theories and the bright, beautiful future he was building for himself. My voice began to shake. The tears I had fought for so long finally came, not as a trickle, but as a flood. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. The man who took that future, his lawyer has told you his story. A story of addiction, of hardship. And that story is true. It is a sad story. But it is not the story we are here to answer for today. We are here for the choice he made after the accident. The choice to look in his rearview mirror, to see what he had done, and to press the accelerator. He did not see a person. He did not see a son, a student, a young man in love. He saw a problem. An inconvenience. He valued his own freedom, flawed and criminal as it was, over Liam O'Connell's very last breath. I turned and looked directly at Judge Colbert. The judge told me to control my emotions. I said it softly, then turned my gaze back to the jury, my eyes shining with tears. For 15 years, I have tried to do just that. I believed that to be strong, to be professional, I had to be dispassionate. I had to build a wall between myself and the pain of the people I was supposed to be serving. But I was wrong. Some stories are too important to be told from the other side of a wall. To tell the story of Liam O'Connell without emotion would be to tell a lie. It would be to disrespect the profound love his mother has for him. It would be to ignore the beautiful, complicated, precious life that was stolen. I finally turned to Siobhan, holding her gaze, including her in this moment, in this truth-telling. You have the power today to finish the story. The story that began when a little boy hid behind his mother's legs. The story of a young man who looked at the world's chaos and decided to become an engineer, to build something better. You can tell Marcus Thorne, and you can tell this entire city, that a life like Liam O'Connell's is not collateral damage. It is not a consequence. It is everything. It is the very thing we are here to protect. Find him guilty. Not because you lack compassion for Marcus Thorne, but because you have too much compassion to let Liam O'Connell's life be erased by a mistake. Give his mother the only thing she has left, the certainty that her son's life mattered. That it meant something. Find Marcus Thorne guilty because Liam O'Connell deserved to live. I was empty. Spent. I stood there for a moment, exposed and vulnerable, before walking back to my seat on trembling legs. The courtroom was so silent I could hear the hum of the lights. The jury was out for 4 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were solemn. I held my breath. The foreman stood. On the count of vehicular homicide, we find the defendant, Marcus Thorne, guilty. On the count of leaving the scene of a fatal accident, we find the defendant, Marcus Thorne, guilty. There was no outburst. Just a collective, heavy exhalation. Marcus Thorne hung his head. David Chin put a hand on his shoulder. I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like I had just survived a shipwreck. As the courtroom emptied, I slowly packed my briefcase. Siobhan was waiting for me in the hallway. The crowd had gone. It was just the two of us in the vast, echoing space. She didn't say a word. She simply walked up to me and wrapped her arms around me. It was not the hug of a victim to her prosecutor. It was the hug of two soldiers who had survived the same long, terrible war. We held each other and we cried, for Patrick, for the life that was, for Liam, for the life that would never be, and for the 15 years of silence that had stood between us. He would have been proud of you, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. The man he was becoming, he would have been so proud of you for saying what you did. In that moment, it was all the justice I would ever need. I never rebuilt the dam. Not the way it was. The water is still there, the ocean of emotion, but I have learned to sail on it instead of trying to hold it back. I still wear the black suit. I still build my cases with logic and evidence. But I no longer see my heart as a liability. I see it as my most important piece of evidence. It tells me what is truly at stake. The judge told me to control my emotions. But I have learned that the most powerful form of control is not suppression, it is the courage to feel, deeply and fully, and to channel that feeling into a force for truth. The world breaks everyone, but some of us are strong in the broken places. And it is from those broken places that the most authentic justice finally flows.